Good morning and welcome to Frank's School, 5th year, 118th day, first video. This is a subject that I have been, I'd almost say afraid of. Because in a way, for me personally, it's too big. How do I start? What do I do with it? But I decided I better just at least start it. This is, I could say this is still part of being philosophical about Frank's School. Camp Ranch campus. Well, Camp Ranch, this house is on the government will say, or whatever, this is Camp Ranch Lane right here. And if you approach here, you'll drive on Oppenheimer Road is the name they give it now, named after the Jewish family that bought this, set up the mining operation in about 1880, late 1880s. And in Camp Ranch Lane, my mother didn't like the idea that it was these things were going to be named. But anyway, she said, well, it's going to be named Camp Ranch Lane. And she insisted on lane, not road, because she said, if you say a road, that suggests it goes the whole way through. And it doesn't. It probably once did, possibly, but it doesn't anymore. Anyway, Camp Ranch Lane. Now that word Camp Ranch, that was the name as a child that we always knew this as. This was the camp, this was the ranch. We didn't call it the Camp Ranch. We just called this as the ranch. But let me, I'm getting ahead of myself in a way. J.J. Camp was my grandfather, and I dearly loved that man. He had 3 children. He died in 1967. He had 3 children. My mother, Barbara Elizabeth Bottenhorn Camp Antonson, actually would be her whole name. And he had a second daughter, Helen, who married a Palmer, Helen Palmer. And then he had a son, Frank Bradley Camp. And I'm Frank Bradley Antonson. I was named after Frank. That's where the name Camp is coming from. Barbara had 4 girls and me, one son. Helen had 3 girls. So of Grandpa Jim, that's what I always think of him as Grandpa Jim's 8 grandchildren. There was only 1 boy. And at that time, I guess it's probably true to say that it made a difference. Certainly girls would say, oh yeah, that made a difference if you were a boy. Well, in any case, Frank Camp was killed in World War II. He was a pilot. I'm guessing that it happened about 1942. I could know exactly, except as I say, this is highly personal, and I am a little careful about how deeply I go into it because it's sensitive territory for me. He was one of the very first pilots to go over, and he went to Britain and then down to Morocco, and in the northern Sahara. That's where he was shot down and killed. So there, it broke my grandfather's heart, of course, and his wife, Minnie Martha Nancy Bottenhorn. Minnie Martha Nancy Bottenhorn, and when she married Camp, she was of German extraction herself, Bottenhorn, but I don't know how far back. She wouldn't have had an accent, I don't think. I only barely saw her because when I was really tiny, because I would guess that she died, it might have been around 1948 or 49. So, and it matters according to what I'm going to say. Well, Frank had written home to his father. Oh, and Frank seemed to have been a very popular, athletic young man, very popular, raised in Roaring Spring, my hometown, about 25 miles from here. And he'd written home that he really wanted his father to buy some land for him because when he got home, he wanted to farm. And actually farming, it's one of those things that I need to take much more time with this, and maybe I will, but I got to be a little careful, I think, to not take too much at this point. But farming within my family, back at that time anyway, was way more than just a struggle. I think Grandpa Jim had some money, and before him some money, and also I think that I think that they were well educated. My mother used to say, think of him as a gentleman farmer, almost in the Victorian sense. Although my mother would insist Edwardian. This would be Edwardian, not Victorian. Uh, they were. My mother and Helen and Frank were. Frank, I'm not sure, but yeah, all three. They were born on a farm in Cherry Tree, Pennsylvania, and Grandpa Jim and that farm. Well, I'm not going to go into this whole genealogy now. I don't really have to now. But the point I'm trying to make is there was this love and admiration of farming, and a wish to experiment, I think, to some extent too, in a gentleman farmer sense. Although Grandpa Jim was absolutely a hands-on guy. I mean, he was an older man when I knew him so well and got heavy. He had a job as a milk inspector and drove all around the farms, taking me with him in the summers when I could go. My family lived in New Hampshire for my youth, but I lived for the month or so that I could be down here in Pennsylvania with my grandfather. That was everything to me at the time. Anyway, he bought the land for almost nothing. I mean, ultimately he had 600 acres. At that time, nobody had any money. They didn't want land. This land in particular had real issues, and people knew it. I think he ultimately had 600 acres, and I think he bought his first 550 or something like that for about $3,000, maybe less, something like that. Now that 600 acres, well, I'll say that for last. So anyway, he bought the land. My father remembers actually walking around here with him as he was trying to make up his mind, should he buy this land or should he buy some good farmland not too far away. Well, he bought this land. But then, within about a year, I think, and I don't have this timing right, he found out that his son had been killed. I was born in 1946, and when I was conceived, the war was still going on, World War II, and I was named then a boy. I was named after Frank, and you know, I knew, and I never really could or even tried to live up to my grandfather's, I don't know, love and expectation of his son, but he was very, very good to me, and we were very close. So it broke my heart in 1967 when he died. He didn't reach the years. He didn't reach 70 years old. Well, anyway, for about, and then his wife had died for about, I don't know what, 25 years, over 20 years, 25 years probably. Well, 20 years. He worked on this place, and I am living in his legacy in so many ways. Now, I have his letters out there at the Cherry Tree House that he wrote once a week to my parents, and it's one of those things I've been so reluctant to read them because I'm not so sure my heart can take it. That's how close we were. But in another sense, not all, but all the buildings that I haven't built are his, and he invested so much time and effort and money into trying to do something with this. It became sort of like a hobby of his. He never slept here a single night. He always stayed in Roaring Spring, 25 miles away. But he would come out whenever he could, and he had a hired man. Now, he got a lot of money off the mountain, I think, from the timber that was up there. But I just hadn't better be too long about that. Anyway, that's when it became known as the Camp Ranch. And he didn't really he realized, I think, it couldn't really be a farm. That's why he called it a ranch. He tried cattle. You know, he fenced it. He had, I think, at one point maybe 50 cattle. And then he tried hogs. But neither of them worked out. I mean, this land, as I say, has real issues. But he invested huge time, money, and love into the property. And the ranch, as we knew it, was very dear to all 8 of us. Although as time went on, for the girls, there was less of a role here. One of these 3 girls had a similar permanent love for the land as I do, and she now owns a majority of the acreage. Of these girls, my youngest sister is like me, lives in Roaring Spring, and she is devoted to it and owns acreage too. But my wife and I own 37. In all the fighting and stuff, see, these 2, neither one of them wanted to sell it because it was too dear to them. And they fought over the land and eventually divided it. This was a little bit of a simpler arrangement because the one girl was able, well, the one girl bought the other 2 out. This got nasty because, as I say, by that time the love had been gone, and the girls did not, 3 of them didn't really see any role for themselves here. So anyway, in all that process, things got all divided up, and my wife and I ended up with 37 acres. That's where the buildings are. That was what was right, because I had got myself trained as a carpenter, and I was the only chance that the buildings had of being repaired. I need to stop. I'm going to come back to this story. But I got it started now, and as I say, I was a little afraid to do this. Camp Ranch. And so actually, I think I'm going to think of this now as the Camp Ranch campus of Frank's School. Frank's School does not have to be at this particular spot. Most of it, it is online. There could be other campuses. But anyway, I think I'll probably settle on this. Here is the Camp Ranch campus, and that deals with that name. All right, bye for now.